Well, it is no secret, of course, that Donald Trump and the US intelligence agencies don't really get along. So, what does that mean if Trump gets back into the White House? And what does it mean for America's place in the world? I spoke to former US Defense Secretary under several Democrat administrations and Obama-appointed former CIA Director Leon Panetta. For more on this, I'm joined now from California by the former US Defense Secretary and former Director of the CIA, Leon Panetta. Mr. Panetta, sir, thank you very much for your time. We, of course, would like to talk to you about the US presidential election race. You've seen a few. How would you define this one?
Well, from every perspective, it looks like it will be a very close race. And it probably come down to 6 or 7 states because of our electoral vote. It will be dependent on who's able to win those states. Right now, there's no question that the Harris campaign has some momentum and seems to be doing much better in terms of the polls. And so it looks like it's going to come down to the wire. The way we've had elections these last number of years is going to be very close and probably won't be decided until the last minute.
Now, of course, you spoke recently at the Democratic National Convention. You have served in many Democrat administrations. So I do want to talk to you about Harris, how she ended up in the role, what her policies could be. But before we do that, let's talk about the alternative, which, of course, is another Trump presidency. What does that look like to you?
Well, we certainly know from the 4 years that he was president, what his foreign policy will be or not be. He is somebody who basically proclaims that he has a policy of America first, almost a form of isolationism kind of approach, and that he would probably withdraw from a number of our alliances abroad. And so it's pretty clear that he would not exercise the kind of important world leadership that the United States has exercised going back to World War II. And in addition to that, he's somebody who operates pretty much by chaos and uncertainty. You're never quite sure what he will decide. You're never quite sure where he's going to come down on an issue. And the result is that there's a great deal of unpredictability with regards to U.S. policy.
I'm glad you brought up foreign policy then. Let's stay with that, because you talk about fears about Trump withdrawing America from certain alignments. Are there multilateral organizations like, for example, the future of NATO you're concerned about?
Very much. Look, I think we live in a very dangerous world right now. We've got the challenge from Russia, particularly what they're doing with Ukraine, going after a sovereign democracy. We have the challenge from China and their threat to go after Taiwan. We have North Korea, which is a nuclear-powered rogue nation in the world that threatens stability, particularly in the Pacific. We have Iran, which is very near developing a nuclear weapon and promotes instability in the Middle East. We have the situation, obviously, with the Middle East war with Hamas and Iran. And so there's a great deal of danger points in the world. And I think the most important way to deal with those danger points is for the United States to work with our allies to be able to develop our security approach in dealing with each of these threats. So world leadership by the United States is particularly important in a dangerous world.
Who do you see as posing the biggest threat to America right now?
Because there are so many dangers that are out there, I think probably the biggest danger is making sure that our democracy works here in the United States and that we have a strong democracy. We're a country committed to our Constitution. We're a country committed to free and fair elections. We're a country committed to the rule of law. All of those are now in some way being challenged. So I think probably the most important thing that can happen is for the United States to be able to develop a strong democracy that can provide the kind of world leadership that I think is critical in today's world.
How concerned are you? You mentioned there about interference in your democratic processes. A recent issue, well, it's not recent, it's one that gets highlighted in every election in the US and in the UK over recent years, and in Europe, about Russian disinformation playing a role in the US presidential election debate. There's been stories about sort of Russian-funded influence operations in video and online and digital, and of course across social media. How concerned are you about that?
Well, extremely concerned. We had the Justice Department this week announce indictments against some Russian players who were engaging in disinformation and trying to undermine our election system. Look, the Russians have been trying to interfere in our election system going back a long way. They did it in 2016, they did it in 2020, and they're doing it now in 2024. They are using social media. They're using cyber attacks of one kind or another. They're trying to distort information that goes to our people. And so it does represent a threat to free and fair elections, what Russia is trying to do.
And then there's, of course, the more overt things. Russian President Vladimir Putin, just in the last few days, coming out and, quote, endorsing Kamala Harris, saying that would be his pick for the election. How did you receive that?
Well, I don't trust anything Putin says or does. And this is in line with that. It's pretty obvious he has a close relationship with Trump, supports Trump. He supported Trump in the past. And so, you know, having Putin just lie about who he's supporting right now, I think just further tells you that whatever Putin says or does cannot be trusted.
So that's focusing a bit on outside influence into the US, protecting your democratic processes during this election. But let's think more again about that foreign policy, that outward-facing United States. Do you feel like the United States of America still has the same sort of global influence, the same legitimacy it had during your career in office? You know, there's various offices you held now.
Well, I'm a believer in the United States as a strong world leader. That's a role that we have played going back to World War II. And every president of the United States, with the exception of Trump, believed strongly in the United States providing world leadership, working with our allies, whether it was in NATO, whether it's our allies in the Middle East, whether it's our allies in Asia, trying to build strong alliances so that we can work together to try to preserve peace in the world. That is an important role. I believe that the United States has to remain the strongest military power on the face of the earth, and that using that can also exercise diplomacy, working with our friends and our allies to be able to confront the challenges that we're facing, as I said, in a dangerous world. So I am a very strong believer in the importance of the United States providing world leadership. I think President Biden basically has brought the United States back into that role of world leadership, particularly pulling together NATO to come together in a way that would support Ukraine against Russia, but also working with our allies in the Middle East to try to hopefully see if we can bring some peace to that part of the world as well.
Biden's policy on the war in Ukraine has been absolutely clear. The support has been unwavering. But when it comes to his foreign policy regarding, say, Iran, he's been criticized for being weak. Would you agree with that? Well,
you know, it is very important to understand that Iran does represent a threat in the Middle East, going back a long way. I don't think it was helpful, frankly, to have Trump walk away from the nuclear agreement because it gave Iran a license to continue to enrich nuclear fuel and move towards developing a nuclear weapon. I do think that the United States working with our allies, frankly, in that part of the world, working with the UAE, working with Saudi Arabia, working with other countries that are concerned about Iran's influence. We need to develop a strong coalition in the Middle East that can confront Iran. That is something that I believe the United States has to do, working with our allies.
Well, then let's talk about Kamala Harris picking up the baton, so to speak, from Biden. And if she does win election to the White House, do you think it will be a continuation of Biden's foreign policy, or does she have some departure points?
No, I think she'll be her own person. She is, I've known her going back a number of years here in California. She is first and foremost a prosecutor, was a strong prosecutor here in California, was Attorney General, and as Vice President, obviously has engaged with a number of foreign leaders and helped negotiate a number of issues that the United States has been involved in. But I believe the most important thing about Kamala Harris is that she is a pragmatist. She believes in dealing with the world as it is, not pretending that, the world is not there and not dangerous. And for that reason, I think being a pragmatist, being a former prosecutor, she's going to want to be able to put evidence together in order to support foreign policy by the United States.
And then how do you think she's going to approach the issue of Gaza and, that balance needed in the US for the election? Do you think she's had an assertive line on that? Do you think you've got a clear concept of her policy on that?
Well, she announced a pretty clear policy in her speech at the convention, which was that obviously we have a bond with Israel and trying to support the existence of Israel. But at the same time, we also are committed to making sure that the Palestinians ultimately have a state of their own and ultimately are able to rule and govern themselves as a people. And so I think she's committed to those goals. I think that's where the United States is and should be. It's to try to see if we can do everything we can to try to develop a two-state solution that can help, hopefully, restore some kind of peace to the Middle East.
Look, in terms of Kamala Harris and the way she came into the role, Biden, of course, stepping aside, making room for her in the recent weeks. How necessary was it for Biden to stand down, do you think?
Well, I don't think there was any question that if he had remained in the race, that he would have been headed towards defeat, certain defeat. He did not perform well in the debate. It confirmed a lot of the worst suspicions about his ability to be able to perform the role of being president. I think once he decided, to his credit, that it was important to step down, it made a huge impact in terms of the politics here in the United States. Suddenly, instead of having two old individuals running for president, we suddenly had a 58, 59-year-old woman who represents, I think, kind of the future. And frankly, what the United States needs more than anything else is a newer generation of political leaders who can look to the future and not the past.
What do you make then of criticism of Kamala Harris potentially not engaging with the media so much so far in this election race? Obviously Trump is always courting the media. We see him out there a lot. He speaks to lots of different rooms, lots of different journalists. There have been accusations that Harris just hasn't got out there.
Well, I think you have to understand the media here will complain about everything, every way they can, if they don't feel like they're getting enough exposure to a particular candidate. But the reality is she's done interviews. She's going to do a debate. She's going to continue to do interviews. And she'll continue to make clear to the American people what her position is as we move towards the election. That's important. I think in our country, there is no way to avoid being ultimately transparent with the American people about who you are and what you represent. So I'm not worried about that in terms of American politics.
Do you think Harris regrets staunchly defending Biden's mental capacity, mental acuity, you know, in just about sort of a month prior before he had to stand down?
No, look, she was vice president of the United States. Most important thing about a vice president of the United States is loyalty to the president of the United States. That's been true for most vice presidents. They wouldn't be in that role if they were not loyal. So she did what she had to do at that point, and now she is the candidate for president of the United States, and she's very much her own person. That is a reflection, frankly, that in our democracy, whatever challenges we face, we ultimately find ways to deal with it and to move forward.
Let's talk then once again just about Trump, if you don't mind, given, of course, your vast background as director of CIA, US Defense Secretary as well. But in terms of the way Trump interacts with intelligence authorities and military authorities, but intelligence particularly, called the intelligence community part of the deep state. How does that work in practice if he becomes president again? How does that relationship get managed?
Well, it makes it very difficult because, very frankly, the role of intelligence is to speak truth to power. That's why we have intelligence. That's why other countries have intelligence sources, is to be able to determine what the truth is and make sure that those who are responsible for leading a country have that kind of information, critical information, in order to make the right decisions. Trump has always had a bad relationship with the intelligence community because he doesn't like to hear the truth. And as a result of that, he was not somebody who, first of all, was willing to really accept that kind of intelligence, but he also treated it badly once he received it. Instead of protecting what is, very classified information, he behaved in a way that actually jeopardized the sources that produced intelligence. So he's not very responsible when it comes to dealing with intelligence. I'm not quite sure how he'll handle it, because if he only wants people who will tell him what he likes to hear, then he will never be able to get the kind of intelligence he will need as president.
That's a worrying concept, of course, with America having the power it does as an economic and military sort of superpower, and the way that geographical elements are tilting increasingly, especially when we think about China and other world powers, and the need or potentially the reality of more military confrontation in the future. Of course, nobody wants to see that. I'm not saying that. It's just there is reality being discussed there. So if Trump was indeed president when there was need for more US military capability, how much control do you think he would have? What would that relationship look like?
Well, that, frankly, from my point of view, that's another problem with Trump, is he doesn't quite understand the role of the military. The role of the military here in our country is to defend our country from foreign enemies. That's the role of our military forces. They are not to be used in this country against our own citizens. They are not to be used to round up immigrants the way Trump is talking about if he's elected. They are not to be used for those purposes. So the military is specifically responsible not so much to the president, but to the Constitution. And therefore, it's going to be a strained relationship should he be elected president, because he keeps talking about the military as if it's his personal bodyguard. That's not what the military is about.
And just while we were on that subject of the way the world is changing, we're seeing certain different geopolitical alliances. Well, not different, they've been there for a while, but certainly seeming to be cemented more in the axis of, parts of South Asia. You're thinking China, you're thinking Russia as well. I mean, you've had just decades to watch this happen. What are the things that concern you most when you think about global security going forward?
Well, I'm very worried about this axis of autocrats in the world. This relationship now between China and Russia and Iran, I think is very dangerous. And it's for that reason that I think the only way to respond to that threat is for those countries that believe in the ability of a country to be sovereign and to deal with its own issues, for those kinds of countries to come together and represent both a security force and an economic force in confronting this axis that's out there that I think jeopardizes peace in the world.
Do you think those types of concerns, understandably from somebody who was a director of the CIA, a US Defense Secretary, do you think they translate to the American public when we think once again about the election cycle and candidates having to talk about how much they would, for example, commit to military defense spending, how big your military is, how much needs to go to intelligence? Do you feel like the American public, I know it's hard to speak about them at large, are sympathetic to those types of concerns?
I think the American people want a strong America and they want a secure America. When I was director of the CIA and Secretary of Defense, I felt my primary role was to protect the safety and security of the United States. And I believe the American people want to make sure that whoever's elected president, that individual will protect the United States of America. And for that reason, I really do believe that ultimately the American people will really care a great deal about whether or not a candidate is truly devoted to protecting our national security, to developing a strong defense, and to building the kind of alliances that I believe are extremely critical for the United States in the 21st century.
Now, thinking about that kind of the law and order aspect of this, and once again, from yourself, somebody in a sort of a CIA man, if you like, and somebody who believes in law and order, what does it feel like watching somebody who's now a convicted felon running for the US presidency?
Look, I think there are some issues that are critical to those that want to be president of the United States. One is that they swear an oath to preserve, protect, and defend our Constitution. Donald Trump, when we had the last election, and he lost that election, instead of implementing our Constitution, refused to accept the results of the election. In addition, presidents believe in the rule of law, that we have to abide by the law. That's critical. That's critical for democracy. It's critical for any country to have a system of laws that people respect. But he obviously doesn't pay a lot of attention to the laws, and it's for that reason that he's in so much trouble from one direction or another. It's because he largely thinks that he can do whatever he wants. And lastly, it's very important to be for free and fair elections in this country. That every person in this country has the right to vote. They have the right to vote for whoever they want, but ultimately they have the sacred right to have their vote be counted. And that's something that obviously President Trump has ignored in the past, and I think he will ignore in the future if he does not succeed in this race for the presidency.
Well, that took my next question from me. I was going to ask you, are you concerned about that if he doesn't legitimately win the next election, that there will be further events potentially on the scale of January 6th, or at least him claiming that it was an unfair election?
No, I worry about that a great deal. But, the thing about our democracy is, we are almost 250 years old. And what our forefathers, those who developed our Constitution, believed was important is that power never be centralized in any one branch of government. And in order to make sure that power would not be centralized, they built a system of checks and balances in our democracy, where the executive, the legislative, and judicial branches are checks in terms of making sure that power is not centralized and that we enforce the requirements of the Constitution. I think ultimately we've survived that over 200 years of history in a way that has protected our democracy, and I think ultimately that will happen again.
And just finally, do you think it is possible, as he has claimed, that the US justice system can be manipulated, weaponized?
That, I'm sorry, that the US
justice system can be weaponized. He calls it Operation Lawfare, this idea that there's a sort of witch hunt for, and these are his words. Is it possible within your system, within the US legal system, for it to be weaponized in that way?
No, look, there are those that will make that effort to try to weaponize the judicial system. But the reality is there are too many checks and balances in our system. We have a lot of judges. We have a lot of courts. We have a legislative process. We have a system of checks and balances that makes sure that ultimately we have to abide by the Constitution of our country. I have great faith in our ability to enforce the Constitution. Despite those that might try to undermine it, I think that there are a lot of people in this country who really do believe in our Constitution and the rule of law.
Former US Defense Secretary, former Director of the CIA, Leon Panetta, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.